Hello, welcome to Lecture 2. My name is Belinda Gibbons and I'm a lecturer at the Faculty of Commerce within the University of Wollongong. If you remember last week, we talked about the interdisciplinary nature of commerce and how all parts of a business work together to achieve its success. We also covered underlying all the parts of a business are the consequences of being socially responsible, worrying about the environment, and also worrying about the economics when it comes to making decisions in business. In today's lecture, we're going to talk about the UN Global Compact and the principles underlying that compact. Some of you may have heard of the United Nations. For some of you, this may be the first time you're hearing these terms or looking at these principles, and we're going to look at them today and cover them. As I'm talking, I'd like you to think about a couple of things. I'd like you to think about what rights do you expect as a human being, and possibly the definition of a human being or the definition of a right. I'd also like you to think about what rights do you expect to have when you start working. Some of you may be working already casually. Do you expect to have good pay? Do you expect to work reasonable hours? Do you expect to be treated well? Think about those things as we go through our lecture today. I'd like you to think about who do you think's responsible for the environmental challenges our world faces today? Is it the government? Or is it business? Is it society? And I'd also like you to think about corruption and the different levels of corruption. And what does corruption mean to you? Is giving your teacher a Christmas present a form of corruption? We'll talk about corruption a lot as we go through today's lecture. Just some facts for you before we get into today's lecture. There's about 195 countries in the world today. Did you know that people are tortured or ill-treated in at least 111 of those countries? Did you know that freedom of expression is restricted in at least 96 of those countries? And when we're talking about freedom of expression, think about what that means. That means voting. That means having an opinion, having a say. It's restricted in 96 countries. 30% of children are in child labour in underdeveloped countries. 30%. And 16% of children are in child labour in developed countries. That's our country. In Indonesia, women undergo virginity tests prior to being allowed to study. Because in Indonesia, if you're pregnant, there's no point in having an education. And on the corruption, 3/4 of our world is ranked as having high corruption levels. 3/4 of our world. That's a very high percentage. Now, I'm a commerce lecturer, and you may be asking yourself, what does this have to do with business? It has everything to do with business, because there isn't a fact up there that doesn't affect an organisation's success, especially when we compete globally today. So think about that as we go through. Being socially responsible. Let's have a look at what that means.
Ryan, this time I think I got just the thing people will remember me for. I am gonna stop pollution with my new lovable character, Gary the No-Trash Cougar. Pick up your trash!
Hybrid people now, people now, people now, hybrid people driving people now. Come on people, let's be people now. Hybrid people driving people now. Come on everybody, be people now.
Do you know what my clients might be giving up? Eat Earth. You want to ruin a planet? Go to Jupiter or Uranus. Global warming is people. It's people. It's their future in the balance.
Don't you have any sense of corporate responsibility?
Now, being business studies students, some of you may have heard the term corporate social responsibility. And again, maybe asking the question, what has it got to do with business? And as I mentioned before, it's got everything to do with business. Never before in history has there been a greater alignment between the objectives of the international community and of those of the business world. Making the right decision is proving to be quite economically profitable for a lot of businesses. And a lot of these issues we'll talk about today are helping them succeed and also helping society. The United Nations Global Compact was founded in July 2000. The principles that we're going to have a brief look at today ask companies to embrace, support and enact within their sphere of influence a core set of values. And these values are in the areas of human rights, labour standards, the environment and anti-corruption. Let's just have a brief listen to when the United Nations first began.
I still remember well my speech at the World Economic Forum in 1999. In those early days, the relationship between the United Nations and the private sector was one of mutual suspicion. Today, thanks in no small part to the Global Compact, business accepts the United Nations as a partner. At the same time, the Global Compact also brought about a historic change within the United Nations. Indeed, today, the UN increasingly understands that working with the private sector is an essential element in tackling poverty, climate change, and virtually every other major challenge we face.
Now, these core sets of values and these principles that we'll have a look at today are not compulsory. As a country, you don't have to sign up for them. But the growing number of members that join the United Nations Global Compact increases every day. The first area is human rights, and there's two principles under human rights. Businesses should support and respect the protection of internationally proclaimed human rights and make sure that they are not complicit in human rights abuses. So obviously that means not torturing our employees or society or people living within our community. But it also means as an organisation that you should be well aware of your suppliers and how they treat their employees or their society. Do you think about Nike? Do you think Nike are aware of how their employees are treated in their suppliers? And how many suppliers do Nike have? Is that a reasonable question to ask? The second area is labour standards. This is how we treat the labour of our workforce. Businesses should uphold the freedom of association and the right to collective bargaining. There should be no forced or compulsory labour. The effective abolition of child labour, so there should be no child labour, and there should be no discrimination in the workforce. When I asked you at the beginning of the lecture to think about how you would like to be treated when you start work or you are working, do these happen at your workforce? Are you discriminated against? Is there child labour? Do you have collective bargaining? Can you negotiate on your wage? These are all things in Australia that we take for granted. But these are the values that we want businesses to uphold. Let's watch a short video on what we mean by labour standards. The next set of core principles is in regards to the environment. These principles ask businesses to take a precautionary approach to environmental challenges. Can you think of an environmental disaster that has occurred in the last few years? Can you think of any oil spills or any nuclear disasters? They want businesses to undertake initiatives to promote greater environmental responsibility and encourage the development of environmentally friendly technologies. And the last principle is in regards to anti-corruption. And the UN would like businesses to work against corruption in all forms, including extortion and bribery. This is quite an interesting and hard value for a lot of organisations to abide by. A lot of countries, corruption is the norm, and that's the way they operate. What's difficult to remember with these principles is that whilst the workforce or the organisation that you work for abides by them, its suppliers may not, or its factory overseas may not. Okay. As I mentioned in last week's lecture, you will very rarely work for an organisation that operates in Australia alone. You'll cross many countries and many cultures and many values that won't be the same as your own. Again, why is this important to commerce? Why are we worried about this? If we follow these values, and businesses do, then they can improve in all these areas. Stakeholder relationships, reduce risk, increase shareholder confidence, enhance their corporation and their brand image and their reputation. All these things will help an organisation succeed. In your lesson today, you are going to play the dilemma game. These dilemmas that your mentor will give to you are actual dilemmas that business experience every day. As you're thinking about the dilemma, remember that there is no right or wrong answer, that the person sitting next to you may be of a different culture, may have different values, and if you were both working in the organisation, you would come up with different decisions. And that's what makes it quite interesting. I hope you enjoy the game. As an example, have a look at this dilemma. You're the purchasing manager for a company and you're buying new supplies for raw materials, or you're picking a new supplier of raw materials. One has an impeccable record but sells at a high price. The other sells at a low price, but there's been reports that they pollute a lot and hurt the environment. Which one would you choose? Remember, there's no right or wrong answer. In the dilemma game, you will be given 4 choices. And within your team, you need to come up with an answer. Do you buy from the high price one because it's good for the environment? Do you try and negotiate with them because you're a major company and you give them a lot of business? Do you buy from the low price supplier and make more profit? These are some of the decisions that you will be working on in business every day. So keep those UN Compact principles in mind, and I will see you next week. Thank you.